What is up, guys? So, around a week ago, Elseworlds came out, the Arrowverse crossover event, and something I did last year for Crisis on Earth X was I went over the 5 things that I would have changed about that crossover. Now, I want to do the same thing for Elseworlds, so keep in mind 2 things. 1, for this list, I won't include any crazy changes to the Arrowverse. This list is 5 things that I thought would have made the crossover better, but none of these things have any impact on the actual Arrowverse. And secondly, I don't have nearly as many problems with this crossover as I did with the one last year, Crisis on Earth X. So with that in mind, let's go over the top 5 things I would change about Elseworlds. So, originally this crossover was supposed to introduce to us Batwoman as well as primarily take place in Gotham City. I don't know if it changed since then or it was always the plan to do Elseworlds in its entire thing with the Monitor. I'm not sure, but the end result was episode 1 and 3 did not take place at all in Gotham City, and they only had small cameos of Batwoman, while episode 2 was what we were promised from the beginning, which is everything to do with Batwoman in Gotham City. So this is not a major problem for the crossover. I said earlier I don't have very major problems with this crossover compared to the last one, but I do think they should have included Batwoman maybe a little more. And what I mean by that is I think she should have appeared in episode 3, and I think she should have had a major role in episode 3. In episode 1, I think they did a pretty good job at building up towards Batwoman. At the end, she didn't really need to appear in that one outside of the tease at the end. Episode 2 did an incredible job at introducing us the character, but what I think it didn't really do, entirely at least, was convince me that Batwoman deserves her own spin-off show. Now, I was a little less skeptical about the spin-off show after this crossover because originally I was excited about the show, and then it turns out that Ruby Rose was cast in the role. I didn't like that because I don't think she's a very good actress in the movies I've seen her in. Then this episode came out, and I definitely think that Batwoman and Ruby Rose are a little bit better than I expected them to be, but not to the point where I think they 100% deserve a spin-off show. So I think with episode 3, they could have given her something more to convince me and everybody else who watched the crossover that Batwoman did 100% deserve this spin-off show, and I think that would have made the whole crossover a little bit better. Also, we were promised by Stephen Amell that this crossover would focus around 5 characters, those characters being Green Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Superman, and Batwoman, and we didn't really get that in this crossover. Batwoman had only a major role in 1 episode, Superman only had a major role in 2 episodes, so I don't think that was entirely correct, and one of those characters, which is Batwoman in this slot, I would have changed that, and I definitely will get to Superman later in this list. So while part 1 of the crossover was practically perfect, I honestly can't think of any problems with the episode whatsoever. Part 2 and 3 are different stories. So part 2 had one problem I didn't really like, part 3 had a couple, but the one that part 2 and 3 have in common are the kind of pointless character talking moments. Specifically in part 2, it was all the scenes where a character talked to Felicity, a character like Caitlin, a character like Team Arrow, a character like Oliver in particular, and in part 3, it's between Kara and Alex. So I don't think these scenes served any purpose for the crossover whatsoever. For Felicity, it was there to fix Oliver and Felicity's problems they cultivated in the season, which I hate the fact that they use the crossover as a platform to do this. If you look at all the past crossovers, only 2 of them, those being Invasion and Flash vs. Arrow, have nothing to do with Felicity, and that's just because during those crossovers they weren't together. In crossover number 2, crossover number 4 and 5, they are together at that point, and they use the crossover as a platform to either give them more problems in the case of Heroes Join Forces and Crisis on Earth X, or resolve those problems or any of the problems that they have to this point in Crisis on Earth X at the end, as well as Elseworlds. And I hate the fact that they do this. If you want to do this on Arrow, that's one thing. I won't like that, but at least don't do it in the crossover, because it just brings down the crossover. It has nothing to do with the crossover. I despise the fact that they use the crossovers as a platform to resolve or create problems for Felicity. But then you have Alex and Kara. So for the Alex and Kara scenes, the reason that these scenes brought this episode in particular down is because they are very, very pointless. Now I know in the plot they serve a purpose of getting Kara out of prison, but one, they should have done that in one scene instead of 3 scenes, or however many scenes they had between Caitlin or Killer Frost talking to Alex, Kara talking to Alex a couple times, and Superman talking to Kara. I mean, really Superman talking to Kara and then Kara talking to Alex. That's all they needed, one time each, and I think that would have been fine. But to talk to Alex 3 different times, a character we will never see again. This is the Earth 1 Alex. We will never see her again ever. She doesn't really need any character development. Her whole reality was changed back anyway. So as for character development, this scene meant nothing outside of getting Kara out of prison, which they could have thought of something way, way better to get her out. Specifically, this is where I would have 100% included Batwoman in the episode. They could have explained that in this new reality, Batwoman is some mortal enemy to Superman. Maybe she's even a criminal in this new reality. It doesn't really matter, but she sees this opportunity where Supergirl, a very powerful being, is captured by her enemy. She sees a likely ally, so she sneaks in, and we see her stealth abilities, which the Bat family definitely has. She sneaks Supergirl out. She breaks Supergirl out of the prison. That would have been a great way to include Batwoman, and a much better way to get Supergirl out of the prison without having to do all these extraneous scenes between Supergirl and Alex, as well as between Alex and Killer Frost. However, getting rid of all these scenes would definitely leave us with some extra screen time, and I definitely 100% know what to do with it. One pretty big disappointing point of this crossover is the characterization and motivation of the main villain, and I'm definitely not talking about the Monitor. The Monitor was the main antagonist of the crossover, but I very much struggled calling him a villain because what he was doing was preparing the Earth for a villain, so I can't really consider him a villain, but he definitely was the antagonist of the crossover, while Dr. John Deegan, aka Dr. Destiny, or he will be called Dr. Destiny, was the main villain. So my problem with this character is he did not get motivation, he didn't get much characterization, and he just wasn't developed nearly enough to be a good main villain for a crossover. Now don't get me wrong, he was a pretty good main villain. I thought Tyler Hoechlin did a pretty good job in the role in part 3 as a pretty menacing villain, and the other actor, who I still can't remember his name, I think I did a pretty good job in the role as well as that other less confident doctor, as opposed to this god where he gets a lot of confidence later. I did like that, but in terms of his motivation, we were told the motivation but not shown it at all. So in the second scene of the first part of the crossover, we were introduced to Dr. John Deegan in a scene where he's clearly very frustrated with the fact that all these superheroes exist and how powerful they are. All these people see him as a crazy person, and then he gets recognized by this cosmic being, which I'm sure would give him a confidence boost, which is why he's so confident in part 2, and after that he becomes this really large, powerful man. So it makes sense he would be even more confident in part 3, so I don't really mind the character change and personality change between the actors of Tyler Hoechlin and, I can't remember his name, the actor who played the actual John Deegan. I don't mind that whatsoever. What I do mind is his motivation in the opening monologue of part 3. We were told that it was something to do with giving hope to Gotham, which was fine and all, but it was never addressed at all in the actual crossover. He never actually said the word Gotham at all. He doesn't really care about Gotham, it doesn't seem. And when he finally got the power to become a superhero, he was in Central City, not in Gotham City, so this doesn't really make any sense to me. And I think John Deegan could have definitely benefited from having some sort of extra development, really showing us, not just telling us his motivation, really showing and developing him as a character, making him a much better villain. And this right here is what I would replace all the Felicity and Alex scenes that I felt was incredibly extraneous. We got all these extra scenes that didn't need to be there, which took up screen time from something that the episode and the crossover lacked, which is motivation for the main villain and development for the main villain. So in this crossover, I think that episode 1 and 2 are vastly superior to part 3. You probably will find that most of my problems in this list derive from the third part, and that's just because the third part was pretty disappointing compared to part 1 and 2, and one of those reasons is because of the body swap between Oliver and Barry. The first two parts definitely benefited from having this concept. It was a genius concept, executed incredibly well, leading to very funny and entertaining moments in the first two parts of the crossover, and it was just thrown away for episode 3. What they could have and should have done for part 3, instead of get rid of the body swap and make it so that Oliver and Barry have no powers or abilities whatsoever, although Oliver did have some abilities in the first scene and then they're just gone. It's really weird, but Oliver and Barry's body swap should have stayed, and instead of the conflict or their desperation being that they don't have powers, it should be that they are just not used to their powers and abilities still, because Oliver and Barry were neither of them were really used to their abilities or powers 3 days in. I mean, Oliver, it's different. He cultivated the abilities over 5 years of training, but Barry, when he got his powers originally, for the first 3 days, he definitely was not used to those powers, so I think Oliver should have not been used to the Flash's powers even at this point. That could have led to some entertaining moments, and that could have explained why they needed Superman's help. It could have also been that they went to get Vibe's help because Oliver just was not able to run through realities or universes because he just doesn't know how to, or it doesn't work for them. So I don't think this really would have been any problem to fit into the narrative. They're very much struggling with the Black Suit Superman because they're not used to their powers and abilities, so they get desperate. They try to run to Earth 38. Oliver fails, so he goes to get Cisco's help. Cisco vibes them or breaches them to Superman. Superman comes to Earth 1 and helps them in this fight. You could also bring along Martian Manhunter and Brainiac 5 as well. I don't think that would have been a problem for the narrative, and in the end, it would have made the episode much more entertaining. And also, more importantly than that, the moment where Oliver and Barry got their powers and abilities back and went back to being their normal selves, it would have been that much more satisfying, because you see them fumbling, not really knowing what they're doing for a lot of this, but then they go back to being their normal selves and they kick all of these fake people's asses, all the people from this alternate reality that don't know they're an alternate reality. It would have made these characters seem incredibly badass, and it would have made a much more satisfying moment in a much more entertaining episode. Much like Batwoman, we were promised more from Superman in this crossover, and in this particular case, I'm not actually talking about the screen time, because Superman did get quite a lot of screen time in episode 1 and 3, and in episode 2, I don't think there was much room for him. I don't think in Gotham City he didn't really need to be there. I think that Kara, Oliver, and Barry's dynamic was good. In fact, it was incredible, and Superman maybe would have disrupted that a little bit in this episode, so I'm actually kind of glad he didn't appear in episode 2. But for episode 3 in particular, Superman was just wasted as a character completely. A YouTuber named John Campia went over exactly what the CW does wrong about Superman. They practically hate Superman. Any chance they have to make Superman look bad just to make Supergirl look good, and they take it. In this episode in particular, he got his ass kicked by the Black Suit Superman, despite the fact that they have the exact same powers, or so we were told, and right after that, Supergirl swoops in, heat visions the Black Suit Superman, and that knocks him out for a couple minutes. We don't see him for a couple minutes, and that is ridiculous. Later, throughout the episode, we see that Superman doesn't really know what he was doing a lot, which does not make any sense. Superman has been a superhero in this continuity for over 15 years, which means he has even more experience than Oliver Queen. It just doesn't make any sense that he is just standing in the background, not really calling any of the shots, not really contributing anything outside of saying that the Flash and Supergirl would die, which they don't even acknowledge. They just say, alright, whatever, and then they go commit suicide for no reason, which I would change that, but I can't really think of any way to change that without really making drastic changes to the crossover. But Superman, he was made to look like an idiot in this crossover. He wasn't really a character. He was just there for as a prop to make Supergirl look better, and that's the number one thing I would change about this crossover, because at the end of the episode, Superman literally says the world doesn't need Superman if it has Supergirl, which is just a middle finger to any of the fans of Superman, and it's just not something Superman would do. It doesn't make any sense, and I really hated that. So the number one thing I would change about the crossover is Superman. Give him a more leadership role, make him an equal to DEEGAN and Supergirl, and don't use Superman as just a prop to make Supergirl look better. Use him as a fully fledged character, and the character he is in the comics, which is one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved superhero on the planet, which is Superman. So those are the top 5 things I would change about Elseworlds without completely and drastically changing the crossover and its impact on the Arrowverse. If you disagree with my list, leave yours in the comments down below. Which one of the slots on my list do you think they should have implemented the most? And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.